All right, buckle up. This one's a doozy. Let's talk about how Doug Ford and the Conservatives actively mismanage the Peel District School Board and use that as an excuse to take over other school boards. Because you may have heard recently that the Ford government is planning on taking over a few school boards and they're blaming it on woke stuff, saying that the school boards are mismanaging their funds, the funds that are getting cut every year. But it goes so much deeper than that. So what you're seeing in the news is that school boards are pausing the renaming of schools because the Ontario government is giving itself new powers in order to stop school boards from doing that. And that's what Doug Ford wants you to focus on, the school renaming and the art purchasing stuff. But who gave these school boards the directive to start renaming these schools? That directive literally came from the Ministry of Education in 2020. Because from 2020 until 2023, the Ministry of Education took over control of the Peel District School Board. Do you remember a couple years ago when Peel Libraries had no books in the schools because the board was doing a book-by-book audit of all the books to make sure that they were appropriate for kids? That's what all of this was from. And it was under the directive of Doug Ford's Ministry of Education to rename schools in the Peel region. So how much does it cost to rename a school? Well, budgets are public. And on average, you're looking at about $60,000 to fully rename a school, and that's a one-time cost. And remember, the province is talking about record-breaking new budgets. $30 billion in education spending, which, by the way, puts Ontario at some of the lowest per capita in Canada and also has not kept up with inflation in years. So it's really a budget cut. And if it's not, then how do you explain the semester-wide 3 classes of 37, 37, and 35? But when you look at the budget, the cost of renaming a school in the Ontario budget is about 0.0002% of the budget. Not nothing, but kind of nothing. And once again, this was all a ministry directive. But you know what's funny? All of these DEI policies that were actually brought in by the Doug Ford government have vanished from their website. So they're blaming DEI and wokeness and financial mismanagement when they were the ones who literally caused it, and now they're covering up their tracks. Like, here's another great example. Right after the Ford government took over control of the Peel board, Peel Regional Police were pulled out of the PDSB. The Ford government took over control of the board in June, and by November, they were taken out of the schools. And now Ford is passing a law that's basically forcing school boards to let police into the schools. It's almost like Doug Ford doesn't really care about policy and what's best for the students. He just cares about what's best for getting votes. But you know what? Since we're talking about budgets and financial mismanagement, when the Ministry of Education took over the board, they appointed Bruce Rodriguez to run the board. Bruce was previously the Deputy Minister of Education, a government position for which we can see his public salary. And in his last year, he was making $314,000. You know what's funny about the Sunshine List? After he went from working for the ministry to being the supervisor of the Peel board, his salary wasn't public anymore. Do you think a guy that Doug Ford is paying $315,000 a year would take a pay cut to oversee one school board? If we're so concerned about the costs of renaming a school, which by the way is less than it costs to have an EA in the building, why are we not concerned about the costs of the supervisor, who most likely cost hundreds of thousands of dollars, and that number is being held secret from the people? Doug Ford came in, he mismanaged a school board, and then he used that as an excuse to take over control of other school boards. This is Doug Ford's failing upwards incompetence to a T. Doug has spent his entire life failing upwards. He doesn't know what it's like to work hard. He doesn't know what it's like to be good at a job. He just knows what it's like to do and say what he wants, and if things don't go his way, to pivot. Very Trumpian of him. Because while we should all be looking at the budget cuts and while we should all be looking at Doug Ford's mismanagement, he dangles a little something over here for us to what's that? Wokeness in schools? Oh, we're renaming schools and that's because of woke people and DEI? Doug Ford didn't do that. What's that? And Ford does this often. When he gets in too much heat, he either distracts us or he hides. But we cannot continue to let Doug Ford hide from his accountability here. Doug Ford can't govern. It's because he's incompetent, and he shouldn't be in charge of pretty much anything. He doesn't care about you, he doesn't care about your kids' education, and he does not care about this province. He just cares about making his donors happy. And every time Doug Ford does something wrong, makes a mistake, or his government is responsible for something that people don't like, he will turn it around and blame wokeness, blame DEI, and blame whoever he can. He will never take accountability for his mistakes. If you want to stay up to date on news and politics in Ontario, hit the like and follow button.